Hey there everybody, welcome back to the channel. So in today's quick video, Para-Bellum was kind enough to send me out their latest lore campaign pack for Conquest, Last Argument of Kings, and this is the Crucible of Wills, the Vale of Tears. So this box is packed with a lot of really awesome lore goodness that we're going to dive into later in the video, as well as two bespoke character miniatures that we're going to look at as well. So without any further ado, let's go down to the hobby table and take a look at the contents of this box. As I just mentioned, there are two character miniatures that come in the box. They are both resin, and I've said it again, the resin that Para-Bellum uses for their bespoke character miniatures is honestly the best resin I've handled ever in my life. Like, I know a lot of people kind of don't like working with resin miniatures, but the level of detail and the ease of working with these is just far superior than any other resin miniatures that I've seen out on the market. So for the Yoroni side, we've got Murakami Wako, who is an alternative sculpt for the Oyabun miniature, and we'll dive kind of into his backstory when we talk about the lore book. And then on the Wadrun side, we have Nangenyua, who I'm probably butchering that name, but his moniker is the Shadow Who Walks, and he is an alternative predator sculpt for you to use. Now, we've also got, the bases and character stands that you need. You also get a card that shows you how to register for the app. And on the back of this, there's an activation code for you to use. Then you also get your activation cards. So for the Yoroni, they activate with these ideals. So you get a Sui ideal because this bespoke Oyabun in the rules is a Sui character. And I'll explain why when we get to what's in the lore book. And then you get a card for Nangenyua. Now, if you were going to just use these alternative sculpts in a regular game, for the Nangenyua, you would just swap in a Predator card, and then you can actually use the Sui card for your Oyabun. But with the cards out of the way, let's actually open these up and take a look at the miniatures. Now, I've already cleaned up the majority of the flash so that I could just show off the pieces, but there wasn't that much. There was a tiny little bit of mold slippage that you can probably see right along this line. But honestly, that's so easy to deal with given this type of resin that they use. All of the details are super crisp. Can't wait to get him painted. And for a weapon, he's got this giant oar, which is very thematic because he is a Yoroni pirate. Then we've got his tail, little bits and bobs, and then his head. Oh, where's the other part of his head? There we go. Comes in two parts, and everything is keyed and slots together very nicely. So you can see his head just slides in there. And the key for the hand slots in, just a simple glue job. And then now for our Predator, again, same great detail. This Predator is an archer, so we get this really cool bow that's got the decorative feathers and everything. And he's got his tactical tree trunk that he's standing on, looking pretty cool. Lovely textures all throughout for the hair and the feathers. Got an arrow that he's knocking, his quiver, and then his decorative headdress with the bones coming off of the sides. And then he's got a decorative, I believe this is actually, I'm not entirely sure. Oh, maybe he has two different head versions. Oh, that's cool. Yeah. So he's got two different heads. You can choose which one you want to give him. So there's one with this sort of like bird-like death mask, and then there's one where he's barefaced with the headdress. So that's pretty neat. He's got two heads. And if you were a better man than me, you could probably magnetize those and swap them as you see fit. Give me 1 second. We're going to go ahead and build these, and I'll show you what they look like assembled. And we're back with assembled minis. So because these are resin, you are going to want to use super glue, and I use some handy dandy super glue accelerator to get these done in record time. It was light work. By the way, I discovered this super glue accelerator aerosolized in a can on Amazon, and it is way cheaper than buying the hobby branded accelerators that you'll see in your hobby store. So I'll put a link to this up in the cards and in the description of the video if anybody's interested. You can actually buy this in a 3-pack for super cheap, and one can will last you like forever. But with that out of the way, let's look at these minis. All right, so here is our alternate Oyabun, and it looks absolutely fantastic. In my opinion, this is way better than the standard plastic Oyabun. There's way more character in the sculpt, especially since we know that this particular character is a pirate. So we've kind of got the ruffled undershirt here, which is a great detail. The giant oar for the weapon. The way he's dressed is very, sort of brash and brazen. And then the best detail, in my opinion, is his little pet familiar turtle, which doesn't do anything in the game, but looks absolutely awesome. Now, over on the Wadroon side, the sculpt, even when we were looking at it in pieces, looked amazing. Once you get it all together, it looks absolutely incredible. Now, pet peeve of mine, I absolutely abhor base overhang. It just bothers something in my brain. But since this is a leader, it's going to go on a stand by itself. And if you decorate this around it, it's not that big of a deal. You can also use an MDF stand with just a single slot, which is pretty common, and have it centered, and then, it's not that big of a deal. But if you're using it in First Blood, that's like a solid 10 centimeters of overhang. Again, it's just a personal pet peeve, but the sculpt itself, no complaints. It looks awesome. I just wish the base was bigger. C'est la vie. All right, so let me clear this out of the way, and then we are going to dive into the campaign book. All right, so here is the campaign book, and before I open this thing, just a couple of notes. So one, even though Para-Bellum sent this to me early, I am holding off on releasing this video until release day to prevent any spoilers of the information in here for people that derive excitement from opening up the lore campaign pack. They avoid the internet until they get it in their hands, and then reading all of the lore and everything for themselves. So they're even though I'm waiting until day one, massive spoiler warning. I'm gonna pretty much show most of the book, and we're gonna nerd out on the cool bits of lore that are in here. So if you don't want to spoil yourself, you can turn away from the video now and then come back after you've picked up your own box. That out of the way, here we go. All right, so basically here with the table of contents, you can see we've got some background and rules for Murakami. And actually before that, in the setting the stage section, which is a few pages, a decent chunk of some lore, they kind of set up, honestly, a massive new lore bit for the Yoroni that shakes up everything that we know. We'll get into that in a second. We've also got some supporting character profiles to use in the campaign later. So you get a supporting character, Kitsune, as well as a Jurigamu, the geisha spider model. Then we go into the Wadrun side. You get Nangen Yua, a little bit of story on him and his rules for the campaign. And just like for the Yoroni, you get a supporting character, a matriarch. And then you also get 2 special versions of some standard regiments that you can use in this campaign. So for the Yoroni, I believe they have a couple. We'll see them in a second. And the Wadrun have a couple as well. You also get some campaign-specific special items. And then we go into the scenarios, which a couple of these are actually really cool. I'm kind of excited to show them off. Now, in the scenarios, each scenario is prefaced with, a little bit of lore setting up the fight, and then it kind of gives, lore sort of narrative for what happens if one side wins versus the other, which is also pretty cool. All right, so in the setting the stage, I'm going to flip through this really, really quickly. It's really just kind of setting up the background of there was a spire who, was destroyed during the turmoil with the Dregholm. And this spire actually went all the way underground to an underground lake. And because of all of the destructive, primal energies, it actually kind of bridged the Yoroni elemental domains, their version of hell, to Ea, the material world, which is their version of heaven. Now, Murakami, in his backstory that we get into, so if you aren't familiar with the Yoroni lore, essentially they're disembodied demons living in hell, and they sort of collectively desire to, live again and get back to the material world. And there was one demon who sort of constructed, if you can imagine, this giant pagoda, this giant castle, where as you progress up each level of the castle, you have to go through new trials and tribulations until you reach the top. You learn your true name, which they have forgotten as they're swimming around in this elemental primordial soup. And then that allows them to breach into the mortal plane. Now, for eons, that was the only way that they could attain enlightenment. Now, Murakami was on that path, and he got bored. So he decided to break out of the pagoda, like literally punch through the walls, discovered that the elemental soup that was outside was kind of like a sea, and he willed into being his own pirate ship. And he was determined to find his own path to enlightenment by sailing this primordial sea. And, he's battling creatures and, other Yoroni that are trying to stop him. And so as he's going on this journey, very One Piece inspired, if you ask me, he, draws people to his banner. He ends up creating this giant fleet. And then he senses a disturbance in the elemental sea that he's in. And that disturbance was that spire tower being destroyed. So he sets sail towards it and ends up discovering that, hey, we can breach into the mortal realms here. So the rest of the Yoroni are, kind of split. Some of them are like, hey, that's kind of crazy, but whatever. But the bookkeepers, the Onmyoji, and some of the other people who walk the path of the Kotoko Tamagaku, probably butchering that, they kind of take interest. And they're like, okay, we're going to send 2 people to kind of chronicle what you're doing and see if we can help you. because the more options that the Yoroni have to attain enlightenment, the better for everyone. So that's where we get Tide Mistress Mariko joining him, as well as Yagure. So now moving over to Nanganua, he's kind of a tragic Wadrun character. So he lived in a nomadic tribe, and he was the son of their chieftain. They were the Sun Gazers, and they kind of struck out their own path. So their living goddess kind of thought like, hey, you're not acting like everybody else. You're being kind of weird. We think you might be trying to stab me in the back. So she goes and completely wipes out their tribe. And Nanganua is the sole survivor. And she kind of feels bad that like this little kid is kind of left by himself. So she adopts him and raises him and trains him to be a predator. And he's not a natural fighter, but he is a skilled archer. And so she trains him to learn, the stealth skills that he wasn't learning in his tribe. And this kind of gives him split loyalties because he's raised to be loyal to the goddess and he's privy to, lots of occult knowledge and everything that your average Wadrun who's not in the goddess's inner circle wouldn't know. But in the back of his head, he's like, you killed my entire family and everyone I ever knew or loved. He's got conflicted, feelings on that. But they sense Murakame's breach into real space. And now they see the Yoroni conducting some sort of ritual. They don't necessarily know what the ritual is, but they can sense that raw elemental power is being drawn through this breach in reality, and that scares the living daylights out of them, which is a completely reasonable assumption. However, what Murakami is actually trying to do is fortify the breach so it would allow more Yoroni to come through, and it would be stabilized and it would be easier, for them to find and everything. He's not really trying to destroy Ea, he's really just trying to help his people. And, what better reason for a massive war than, a simple misunderstanding? So we get some characters supporting the Wadrun side. We get Matriarch Queen Indilla. And then we also get some storied regiments. So we get a special Damaru Damashi regiment for the Yoroni. And then we also get Captain Waco's personal posse, which is a Kapabushi modular regiment. And then over on the Wadrun side, we get the Shadowken, which are a hunter's regiment. And then we get the Imprinted, which is a hunting pack. And then we get a character apex predator called Gormaw. Then we've also got some special items for the campaign. And then we jump straight into the lore for these scenarios. So essentially, Murakami is right in the middle of trying to, conduct this ritual with Mariko and I forget the other lady's name, but the Spider Woman. And right when they're about to start, the Wadrun attack. So here in this scenario, what makes this kind of cool is that rather than using the standard Conquest deployment rules, even though we're on a similar sort of deployment map, all of your forces start on the board from the very beginning. But you also do sort of like a bidding, sort of hidden deployment. So you secretly select a command card, and then you take turns placing those cards face down in your deployment zone. And then once all of both sides' cards are put down, you flip them over to reveal what regiment it is, and then you put that regiment in place of the card. So you kind of get this, a little bit of a shell game. You're trying to, figure out what your opponent's doing, how you can best, set up your army to counter, set up what they might be doing. But there are no reinforcements. Everything starts on the board from turn one, which is a pretty cool spin on how you play a standard game of Conquest. So I am very keen for trying that out. And then based on who wins, you get some post-battle special conditions. So if the Yoroni win, there's a little narrative here where, nothing crazy happens, but they, capture some Wadroon. And if the Wadroon win, they, kind of get a sense that things are still cooking and they can't really, leave everything just yet. There's also some additional scenario special rules where the characters on the Yoroni side specifically kind of interact with this elemental fog. It ends up buffing a lot of their units as raw elemental power is seeping through the breach. And then for scenario 2, Murakami is still trying to push through with this this ritual, and the Wadroon make ready to attack again. So here, Murakami is trying to take a defensive position. So you've got these objective zones where essentially if the Wadroon can take these zones, it ends up affecting the outcome of, or the setup rather, for mission 3. So you're really trying to keep the Wadroon off of these zones and kind of fortify this half of the board, which makes, again, for a very interesting mission. I would absolutely, play out this kind of a mission in a regular match play game of Conquest. And then we've also got special rules for terrain and so forth for the board, given that we're fighting in this very large cabin that has a literal sea in it. So there's going to be water hazards like rock formations, debris, and so forth from the ships getting destroyed. And then in the very last mission, it's, do or die time for the ritual. So you get some really cool lore, tidbits as they're kind of explaining, both sides are kind of desperate. And then for this battle, it's very interesting setup. So the Yoroni kind of deploy in the center of their deployment edge and can get, almost up to halfway up the board. And then they have this ritual site in the middle that they have to protect. And then the Yoroni, or the Wadroon rather, are trying to flank them from the opposite table corners. And essentially, as long as the Yoroni can keep them away from that ritual site, they have a shot at winning and completing the ritual. Now, depending on who wins the campaign, you get 2 very cool lore sort of tidbits to kind of round this out, which make me very excited for what we're going to see for the Yoroni coming forward. Because either way, whether the Yoroni win or the Yoroni lose, they still learn that this is a viable way for Yoroni to breach into the material world. And in the lore, I didn't quite pick on it, that Spire Tower, that wasn't the only one of these sites where, the destruction of Spire technology ended up thinning that veil between the elemental realm, or Yoroni Hell, and Ea. So this was really just their first attempt at, forcing a breach wider so that Murakami could get his whole fleet through. But there are sites like this all over Ea where they can try again. And now if the Yoroni are victorious, his whole fleet comes through fully intact. The ritual sort of scares away the natural predators that are, the megafauna that are in this little sea, and his whole fleet comes through and they just go on to do piratical things throughout Ea. And then if the Wadrun win, the ritual fails, but the breach is still there. The breach was already there. The Yoroni were trying to widen it. So Murakame's ships still come through, but a lot of them get damaged in the translation. The megafauna are not held back at bay, so a lot of his forces die trying to defend against, the megafauna attacking the ships. But Murakame does escape with his ship relatively intact. So he would be out there trying to, find another breach and help more Yoroni get into the mortal realms a whole lot easier than traversing the pagoda. Because another small tidbit of Yoroni lore, if you're not a Yoroni head, so when you attain enlightenment and you go all the way through the pagoda and you breach into the material world, if you die in the material world, you go back to the bottom floor of the pagoda and then forget who you are again. So for some Yoroni, they might have to go through this 10 times. So it's very important to him as well as the Yoroni historians to find another way to breach through into the mortal realms. And that there is the end of the campaign manual. All right, so that's it. Let me know what you think about the new miniatures as well as those campaign missions down in the comments below. Me personally, this is going to be my de facto Oyabun going forward unless they end up releasing something that looks even more cool. I can't wait to see what the community does to sort of make pirate-themed Yoroni armies or, naval, first blood tables. I think would be really cool. Like if you had a couple of really big sort of 3D printed ships on a water mat and then maybe some, rope bridges or something connecting them together, and you had a boarding action, or maybe a ship that was parked next to, a pier or a port, and they were, trying to invade from a ship. That would look totally awesome. Now, the Wadrun side, I technically don't play Wadrun. However, in buying Yoroni miniatures, because they were paired with Wadrun in their initial two-player starter set, I do actually have Wadrun miniatures, so I will probably paint up the Wadrun character as a small First Blood force, since the new First Blood rules are going to be dropping here at the end of the month. And, we'll get some Wadrun tutorials on the channel to go with the existing Yoroni and the Sorcerer Kings that I've done. But that's it for today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And I will see you all in the next one.